This is not a placebo effect. Check out this review from Elizabeth M. on our mood, memory, and brain from Heart and Soil Supplements. She says, I'm a nursing school college student who used to suffer from brain fog at times. My thinking would be so cloudy that I felt like I was in slow motion. It's difficult to explain. I used to lack focus, but guess what? That changed by the third day of taking mood, memory, and brain from Heart and Soil Supplements. This is not a placebo effect. I like to understand what I'm putting in my body and always test stuff out with a grain of salt. In all honesty, I wasn't expecting this great effect. But wow, now my thinking is clear and fog-free. I can't comprehend how I was functioning before. Animal organs. On a side note, this also helped my menstrual cramps and my mood is great. I'm forever indebted to Heart and Soil. Test it on yourself. Reclaim your birthright to mental acuity. How cool is that? I did a previous podcast on phosphatidylserine in bovine brain extract and benefits in terms of cognitive decline and aging. It's real. Eating brain is a good thing for humans, and it will improve your brain function. So check out Mood, Memory, and Brain from Heart and Soil. All of our supplements are grass-fed, grass-finished, and in glass bottles because that's the way you should do it. Plastic is garbage and bullshit. Reclaim your birthright to optimal health. Check us out, heartandsoil.co. That is .co. And as a note, there has never, ever, ever been a case, never, ever, of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, prion disease in New Zealand, where we source all of our organs from, pristine as the driven snow. On this week's episode, I wanted to talk about water and how to get the best water you can, how to make water pristine as the driven snow. I get a lot of questions. What do you do for water? How do you filter your water? How do you do all of those things? What filter are you using? So I did a whole episode about it. I hope it's interesting to you guys. I find it fascinating. People might say water's boring. I think it's really interesting. We talked about fluoride. I talked about fluoride. I and myself, we talked together about fluoride, about structured water, about alkaline water, charlatanism, chicanery. We talked about bottled water, contaminants, radioactive elements in bottled water. We talked about Tanzania and fluorosis in Tanzania. And we talked about some other cool stuff in terms of how to filter your water. Is a Berkey good? Is not good? Reverse osmosis? Should you remineralize? All those things. So I break it down for you A to Z in this podcast, what to do about your water, things to look out for, whether I think you should be filtering your water and giving fluoride to your kids, etc. Hope you enjoy this one. I believe, I hope that it serves as a valuable resource for you. I certainly enjoyed going down the rabbit hole. On to the podcast, my friends. Welcome to another edition of the Fundamental Health Podcast. This week, I wanted to talk about water. I get a lot of questions about this. I talk a lot about food that I eat. I put a story on Instagram every single day of what I'm eating, or almost every single day, maybe 98% of the time, you can find stories of exactly what I'm eating. Most of my content is around what I am eating: organs, meat, fruit, honey, and raw dairy. Recently, I've been putting some raw butter on my burgers, and it is a game changer, especially with some honey. You can't tell me that's restrictive. You can't tell me you get bored of that. That's one of the most delicious things I've ever had in my life. But a big part of what I eat that you guys might not know the details of is the water that I drink. And I think about this a ton because water can have a lot of contaminants in it. I go to great lengths to get very high quality food. Grass-fed ground beef from a local producer here in Costa Rica called Grass-Fed Costa Rica. I actually know the guys that do it. Diego is amazing. They've been out to the animal-based gathering here. They did a butchering for us. It's awesome to know them and to have connections with a farm that I actually want to go visit in the future. So I know where the meat is coming from. I know where the organs are coming from. I have a guy, an amazing French guy named Lolo with an incredibly poofy hair that comes and delivers me raw goat's milk and some of the best Mariola, which is stingless bee honey I've ever had. So that guy, I know he lives up in the hill and I want to go see his farm. So I can source my milk. I can source my animal meat and organs from people that I know and that I trust. I can go to a local store in town here and get organic fruit, which I love to eat: papaya, pineapple, banana, whatever's in season here in Costa Rica. We're coming into mango season. But another big part of keeping my inputs clean is my water, a huge part of that. In addition to that, of course, I want to be intentional about minimizing exposure to other toxins that might be in my environment. But Costa Rica is pretty clean in terms of other environmental toxins. If we believe that EMFs are a big deal, there's not a lot of 5G towers here, almost none. Although I heard they put one in town. I don't know what happened with that. There's almost no EMF in my house. I have a little EMF meter that I look for just to see what's going on in my house. I don't use any synthetic polyester sheets or clothing. I don't sleep in garbage environments. I try to use air filters in my house to clean the air. So the last piece of that is water in terms of inputs. How do I minimize toxins in my water, or at least maximize the quality of my water. So I went through a variety of filters that I want to tell you guys about, and I'll give you the download right here at the beginning, so you don't even have to wait till the end of the podcast to see what I settled on. And then I want to talk about fluoride, because there's a big question about fluoride in water and pineal gland calcification, which I was originally skeptical of. And I actually found a little bit of evidence for this. I don't think we fully understand what's going on with pineal gland calcification and fluoride, but but nevertheless, I think it's quite fascinating and worth looking into. So I'll talk to you about fluoridation and whether I think water fluoridation is good, bad, or neutral, whether I would drink water with fluoride in it or not. Short answer is no, I avoid it, but there's more to that story that we'll get into. And then I'll talk about a lot of the water chicanery, charlatanism, I think, that is out there. Things like structured water and alkaline water. Though I believe there's some interesting research on exclusion zone or easy water at the interface of a gel medium. I'm not sure we can really translate to biological systems, and I definitely don't think you should be spending $500 to $2,000 on a machine to structure your water. And I think that's a little bit of bullshit. So alkaline water, definitely bullshit. We'll get into why that's bullshit in this podcast. Kangen water, not a fan of that either, because I think that's a combination of some sort of purported structured water and alkaline water. It's double bullshit. You just want clean water, in my opinion. At the end of the podcast, I'll go through some data that I think is quite fascinating, looking at contaminants or freedom from contaminants in common bottled waters. Obviously, you don't want to be drinking bottled water out of plastic. If you're drinking water or storing water in plastic, woe to you. Don't do that. Don't store water in plastic. Not a good idea. Obviously, it's a little bit hard for me to avoid storing my meat in plastic, but minimize your storage and your drinking of water and other things in plastic. Ideally, if I could get my meat delivered in something that wasn't plastic, that would be fantastic. I'm working on that. I got to work on that with Diego from the folks at Grass Fed Costa Rica. But do not store your water in plastic. Do not drink water out of cans that are lined with plastic. This is just extra exposures to potential xenoestrogens like BPA, BPS, BPE, et cetera, ad nauseum, ad infinitum. But even with that in mind, there are many bottled waters out there that are in glass that look pretty in the store, but what's actually in them? When I looked at some research, I was pretty surprised that a lot of those bottled waters that are in pretty glass containers and cost $5+ a bottle, at least here in Costa Rica, have significant levels of radioactive elements like uranium in them, radioactive isotopes. So that's probably not a good thing, and it makes me less inclined to drink them. There's also been a number of scandals or kerfuffles, I should say, about common popular bottled waters like Topo Chico with PFAS in them. There was a Consumer Reports report about Starkey water from Whole Foods with high levels of arsenic. So unless you are filtering the water yourself, you don't really know what's in it, even in a bottled water. I used to love Pellegrino. I think it has a good taste. I think Gerolsteiner has a little bit different taste, but it's good too. But both of those have significant levels of contamination, as you'll see at the end of the podcast. So I find water to be fascinating. It's a huge part of what you put in your body, and I think that's a big piece of long-term health for humans. There is one other piece of the water equation that I will touch on at the end of this podcast as well, which is silica in water. I did a podcast on this a year ago that I will link to in the show notes if you want more details on this. But there is a hypothesis that perhaps the blue zones are related to high amounts of silica in water. Now, if you know anything about my work, you'll know that I'm skeptical of the blue zones concept in general, and that many areas of the world exist with higher levels of longevity relative to the general population, and they have been left out of the quote-unquote blue zones. But if there is a correlation between Nicoya, Sardinia, Icaria, Loma Linda, and Okinawa and levels of silica in water, then maybe it's something to look at. Maybe silica is beneficial, and there is a compelling case to be made that if you get silica from your water or your food, that could be beneficial in ridding the body of aluminum, which is often a contaminant in other foods. So connected with water is aluminum, and perhaps the exhortation to avoid aluminum in your diet and maybe get some silica from somewhere. As you'll see at the end of the podcast, there's a good amount of silica in meat, so you might be fine there also. And maybe that's one reason that we see meat associated with longevity, in addition to all of the other amazing nutrients that it contains with organs. So from the outset, let's just give the value to you guys. I have ended up with a reverse osmosis filter. I was recently on a podcast with Derek from More Plates, More Dates, and he was asking me about water filters. We talked about a lot of things. And I was saying at that time that I've gone through a lot. At that time, I was testing a distillation apparatus, which I hated. It made the water taste horrible. So I have never discovered a distiller that I like. The concept is great, but I think that it's made better with reverse osmosis, which I'll talk about in a moment. But distillation, as far as I've tested it, tastes funny because of the condensation, probably impurities in the metal, the stainless steel where the water is condensing. So I threw out my distiller. I hated the way that water tasted. And believe me, I did 4 to 5, I even did 10 pots of distilled water, and it just continued to taste horrible. I couldn't get anyone to drink it. It was the worst water I ever had. So distillers, not a fan unless you can show me one that is way better quality than what I bought. Maybe something that has condensation on glass, but they're not easy to get. I tried a Berkey for a while. I felt like it was pretty average. I didn't really feel like the water tasted that good. I've had a lot of problems with Berkeys. People have noticed that the actual filter, the Black Berkey element, is just glued onto the apparatus, the little nipple that protrudes through the stainless steel element on top. A lot of water can enter there, and you can just have complete contamination of your water. So I'm actually not a fan of Berkeys. I'll talk a little later in the podcast about the controversy surrounding the, I believe it's the PF2 post filter, the white post filter that you need to get out arsenic and fluoride. Again, I'm going to dive into fluoride in a moment here. But the PF2 post filter, there was some concern that it's adding aluminum oxide to the water. Berkey claims this is inert. I don't think it's a great thing to have added to your water regardless. I do think you should be getting arsenic out of your water no matter what you do. And I think it's probably not a bad idea to get fluoride out. And I'll go into detail on that in a moment. But I'm not a huge fan of Berkeys anymore. I've tried them. I had one here in Costa Rica for a while. The water never tasted great. So what I have landed on is a countertop reverse osmosis filter. If you can get it under the sink reverse osmosis, that's fantastic. But it's been great. It actually shows you on the device. There's no affiliates, there's no sponsors this episode. I'm not going to tell you what device I use. I'm just going to tell you how it works. It shows you what the total dissolved solids are, parts per million before the reverse osmosis, and it's 300 to 400. And then after the RO, it's 15 or 16. Apparently, supposedly, distillation can get it down to 0 ppm, pure H2O, but the RO gets it pretty darn close, and it's been a great option for me. I take the water out of the tap, I put it in this plastic container. It's there for maybe 5 minutes while it runs it through all the filters, and it filters into a glass carafe where the water stays. So that was a great revelation for me, that I could come to Costa Rica, that I could bring a reverse osmosis filter on the plane, put it on my countertop, and use it anywhere. So that was great. That's what I've arrived at now. I think reverse osmosis is fantastic, and it's pretty darn clean water. I don't have to worry about really anything in there. It's going to get out fluoride, arsenic, all the heavy metals, almost every single organic contaminant. There's really nothing in there but water. It's very, very pure water. I think RO is the way to go. The follow-up question to that is, do you remineralize, Paul? And I don't, because look, remineralization drops are generally made from some kind of seawater, and I drink enough ocean water every morning when I'm out there surfing. Sometimes I drink more ocean water than I want to, and I'm eating nutrient-rich fruit and meat. I don't really think that a few drops of a trace mineral thing in my water are going to make that much difference. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think it would hurt to add some trace minerals. Maybe I'll do it in the future, but the reverse osmosis water tastes fine to me. I don't think it's a big deal if you want to remineralize or not. I wouldn't get too stressed about it. I think that basically me swallowing a little seawater gives me plenty of trace minerals. Maybe the coconut water I'm drinking gives me trace minerals because it's actually out of a coconut, and goodness gracious, the food I'm eating has trace minerals in it too. So I wouldn't get too stressed about RO and trace minerals. If you want to remineralize it, great. But I do think that right from the outset, what I have arrived at for water is a reverse osmosis filter, whether it's countertop or under the sink. That's the way to do it. Now, if you're filtering out of your fridge, that's probably a carbon element. That's not going to cut it, in my opinion. I asked my sister today, what do you guys use for water? She said, oh, the fridge. No, don't do that. Get a reverse osmosis filter. I'm probably just going to send her one. What do mom and dad do? What do my mom and dad do? They do the same thing. They're using their fridge filter. It's probably a single carbon filter. It's not good enough, in my opinion. You really want to make sure that your filter is going to get out arsenic and lead and cadmium in massive amounts, and it's going to get out chlorine and fluoride. And very few of those carbon filters can do the arsenic. If you know with Berkey, they have this dense carbon filter, and it doesn't get out arsenic. So they have to do a post filter that also gets out fluoride, but then, of course, there's this contamination of aluminum oxide. So I do not think most carbon filters are going to get out all of the heavy metals that you want to remove from your water. Now, I should have prefaced this whole conversation with the question, why not just drink tap water? Well, here's your answer. If you have any questions about what's in your water, just go to the EWG, the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org/tap water. You can put in your area code, and it'll show you what's in your water. So I put in Austin. I don't live in Austin, but I don't think EWG has a database for Costa Rica, where I live now most of the time. But you can see that in Austin, there are 12 that exceed the EWG health guidelines. Now, the Austin water is not going to exceed any legal limits for the government, but it'll show you here that bromochloroacetic acid, bromodichloromethane, chloroform, dibromochloromethane, dibromoacetic acid, chromium hexavalent, dichloroacetic acid, haloacetic acids, multiple haloacetic acids, trichloroacetic acid, trihalomethanes, nitrates. A lot of these are a problem. I would not be looking at this. And I don't even know if EWG or if this analysis is looking at dissolved pharmaceuticals like birth control or hormonal things. So I would not drink the tap water is the takeaway. Let's put in another area code just to see what comes up. So here's your zip code. Let's put in the zip code actually of the town that I grew up in, the Fairfax County Water Authority. We can see what kind of garbage water I was drinking as a kid, similar to Austin, all the same sorts of things, hexavalent chromium, that's definitely been studied for cancer. All of these same things, nitrates, trihalomethanes, these are pretty common. It just tells you how much they are, nitrate, nitrite. So tap water I drank as a kid was no better than the tap water that I was drinking or I would have drunk in Austin, Texas. I would encourage you, if you think tap water is good, then go to that website and check the quality of the tap water where you live. I want to tell a story here as an aside. There is a group of hunter-gatherers in South Africa, Botswana, Namibia called the Ikung. I want to go visit them next year, maybe later this year. I went to visit the Hadza last year in Tanzania, and I will talk about the Hadza teeth staining in one moment when I get into the fluoride discussion. But the Ikung are fascinating, and they were in this movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy. And as part of that filming, I believe they took some of these Ikung Bushmen back to New York City. And I don't think that the stories, as I've heard, suggest the Ikung Bushmen weren't really impressed by much in New York City. They brought them back to Africa and they asked them, what would you bring back from the city to Africa? And they said, the water faucet. So if we don't appreciate the fact that we can go to a kitchen sink and turn on the water and get water out, that's really miraculous. That's really bringing a lot of people a higher quality of life than having to walk to a river and purify the river that other people are pooping in or peeing in or other animals peeing in. So let's not underappreciate tap water, but tap water is full of contaminants. If the Ikung could turn a faucet and get water, I'm sure their lives would be improved. I don't think they would understand all of the contaminants that might be in it, but I just wanted to put that in there to say that being able to get water out of a tap is amazing. I think that the final level, the final achievement to unlock with your tap water is to then put it through a reverse osmosis filter and turn on your faucet, get the water out, put it in something that's going to make it very pure. And at that point, you have an amazing resource at your home. You don't even have to get spring water delivered. Like I said in the beginning of this podcast, I will review some of the spring water contaminants at the end of this episode. So let's talk about fluoride. I thought originally when I was going to do this podcast that fluoride would be the last thing I would talk about, but it was such an interesting rabbit hole that I want to talk about it first. As I mentioned, this does harken back to my trip to Africa, to Tanzania with Anthony Gustin last year. One of the questions that we got when we showed our videos of the Hadza was their teeth don't look very good. Their teeth are quite brown, many of them. What's going on? I thought they were healthy. Many of us have heard stories of Weston Price type hunter-gatherer or indigenous populations and seen the photos of his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, which are quite impressive and show broad smiles, wide jaws, freedom from dental cavities. And so I think that there are many indigenous hunter-gatherer populations in the world, or pastoralist or semi-pastoralist populations that Weston Price studied. He went all over the world as a dentist that had incredible dental health. And there was a marked discrepancy between the dental health of those people who were eating animal meat, animal organs, animal fat, and non-processed foods, even some grains that were fermented in some cases of these people, but mostly their diets focused on animal foods. If you don't believe me, you can read Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston Price. And there was a marked discrepancy between their dental health and overall health, tuberculosis being an endemic illness at the time, with the people who had become westernized. Often the people of the same genetic stock had become westernized, and you could compare indigenous people from one group to an indigenous group that had become assimilated into the culture and was eating processed sugar, processed flour, and potentially seed oils. Who knows what else they were eating in the early 1940s, but seed oils were definitely a part of their diets, and their diets were much lower in the animal foods that are rich in fat-soluble nutrients, which we know are critical for tooth health and overall immunologic health, that you could see this massive discrepancy. So it seemed a little incongruous that we would go to Africa and find Hadza hunter-gatherers with brown teeth. Now, if you look at their teeth carefully, you realize they don't have cavities, they have staining, and they have something called fluorosis. And if you look even more carefully, you realize that not all of the Hadza had it. Some of them had it and some of them didn't. One other thing we noticed when we were in Tanzania, which was interesting, was that they also smoke a lot. So that could be that could relate somewhat to their dental staining. But as I did some research, I found some really interesting stuff on fluoride contamination of water supplies and fluoride contamination in the diets of Tanzanians, which I think accounts for most of what's going on in the Hadza. So this is a study, severe dental fluorosis in a Tanzanian population consuming water, but the title goes with negligible fluoride concentration. So what they figure out is that there's something that these people are using called magadi, which is a combination of sodium bicarbonate and sodium hydroxide that is used to pulverize or to make vegetables more edible or softer. So they say location, fluoride in magadi, and other elements found in magadi were the main contributors to the fluorosis in these people, which is interesting. So there are some sites in Tanzania that have very high levels of fluoride in the water, but most of the sites tested dental fluorosis and the use of a high fluoride containing Trona tenderizer, magadi, which is this sodium bicarbonate, sodium hydroxide that's used to tenderize vegetables or plants. I don't know why you're using this in the first place, but this actually led to massive levels of fluoride contamination. And fluorosis is dental staining. It can be white pieces, or it can be white patches on the teeth. In severe cases, it can be brown patches on the teeth or pitting. So excess fluoride is very problematic for humans. We know this without a doubt. But you can see here that 18 villages in 4 geographical areas had water supplies with 0.2 to 0.8 milligrams per liter of fluoride. That's higher than most natural sources of water I could find. But in the United States, where most counties have fluoride in the water, a lot of that water is 1 milligram per liter. So kids don't end up with fluorosis from 1 milligram per liter of fluoride. My teeth didn't get fluorosis. I definitely drank fluoride in my water. I wish I hadn't. We'll get on to that in a moment. I also had fluoride treatments at the dentist. That's a scary thing. So dental fluorosis in Tanzania, Great Rift Valley, that's essentially right where the Hadza are in relation to fluoride levels in water and magadi Trona. Now, interestingly, we didn't see the Hadza using this magadi, but they certainly may have. Unfortunately, they did use some cornmeal that was given to them by the missionaries because their hunting lands were encroached upon and they were not able to get all of their food from the land. So I think it's quite possible that even the Hadza were using this magadi in combination with the cornmeal or with some vegetables they were gifted by these people. But nevertheless, I think that there's pretty clear fluorosis in many of the Hadza rather than tooth decay. In general, their diet is pretty good, but this magadi is a real problem for them. So that was interesting because it connected the dots for me. You can see fluorosis in northern Tanzania, testing, treatment, and education towards safer drinking water. Fluoride in the groundwater, high, medium, low in this graphic of Africa. You can see down here, Tanzania. There's nothing terribly high in Tanzania. Most of it is medium or low, but there is higher than the assumed values for the fluoride in the water. There's a little bit of a concentration of medium levels of fluoride in the water in this Tanzanian region. But as we said, I think that it's mostly related to the magadi they're using to tenderize vegetables, and a lot of the Tanzanians are exposed to that. And even in the cities in Tanzania, we see people with brown stains in their teeth from excess fluoride. Not a good thing. Now, if we look at the fluoride concentration, like I said, in the water of counties or states or regions where there is fluoride in the water, that is around 1 milligram per liter of fluoride. Toothpaste is about 1,500 milligrams per liter fluoride, so it's about 1,500 parts per million. Regular water or water that is fluoridated in many places in the United States is 1 part per million. And unfortunately, I learned this as my research, all that gel that they would put on your teeth as a kid. Hopefully none of you guys experienced this, but I know some of you did. The fluoride treatments are 9,000 to 40,000 parts per million milligrams per liter fluoride. So that's the reason they're saying don't swallow it. And they have the suction hose in your mouth, and they're trying to get all the saliva going down your mouth. They're trying not to have you swallow any of the fluoride. I would never let my kids do that. That is a massive amount of fluoride in the fluoride gel. That's horrible for kids. I would never put that much fluoride in their teeth. I would actually recommend against the use of fluoride toothpaste just because it is so high in fluoride. Kids, in my opinion, should not be using fluoride toothpaste. They're almost certainly going to swallow it. Toothpaste is sweet. You can't tell me that if your child is using fluoride toothpaste, they're not swallowing some of it, and they're swallowing 1,500 parts per million fluoride. That's considerably higher than 1 part per million fluoride in the drinking water. So for me, it's a definite no on fluoride in toothpaste, a definite no on fluoride treatments at the dentist. And I'm going to talk about fluoride in water right now. But before I get to that, I want to say this. I do not believe cavities are a fluoride deficiency. If you look at the work of Weston Price and the diets of indigenous people, I think it's very clear that humans can avoid cavities by eating an animal-based diet. I did a podcast a couple of years ago with a biologic dentist, and we talked about the odontoblasts, the immune cells in the teeth that are involved in breaking down or fighting against the enamel damage that is being caused by bacteria when you have an acidic environment in the saliva and teeth after you eat sugar. Most of the mainstream media would believe that sugar causes tooth decay. And I think that is true if you are fat-soluble vitamin deficient and if your immune cells in your teeth, yes, your teeth are living, yes, your teeth contain immune cells called odontoblasts. If those immune cells are not adequately nourished with fat-soluble vitamins, what am I talking about here? Vitamin D from the sun, vitamin E, vitamin A, and vitamin K2 from animal fat, egg yolks, liver, grass-fed animal fat will provide all of those things. Then you may develop cavities from eating sugar. When I was a vegan, I was eating fruit every day, and I went to the dentist, and they told me I had 7 cavities. I didn't fill them at the time. I said, I don't want to get those filled. I didn't know that I was going to not be a vegan in a few months, but guess what? I have 0 cavities now. So clearly changing my diet was a major thing for me, and those cavities did not progress, and I eat a massive amount of fruit right now. If you've seen any of my stories, I do not fear fruit. I do not fear fructose. I've talked about that on previous podcasts at length. So I do not believe that fruit is the only variable in the formation of tooth cavities. I believe that is a connection or a contextual variable with the fat-soluble vitamin deficiency. And we see that hypothesis corroborated in studies of hunter-gatherer tribes and indigenous people who are eating lots of fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin K2 was Weston Price's X factor, this fat-soluble nutrient found in butter, egg yolks, liver, raw milk, etc. That, I think, is the key to a healthy mouth. Now, when I was growing up, did I have a lot of that? Nope. It wasn't because my mom and dad wanted to deprive me of it. They just didn't understand the value of those foods in a child's life. I understand the value of those foods in a child's life. And if I ever have kids, you can better believe my kids will basically be swimming in egg yolks, liver, meat fat, and probably some butter. And hopefully they'll be pretty happy and healthy kids. And I won't fear giving them honey from local raw sources or fruit. And I do not believe they will get cavities. That's an experiment to be done in the future. I will keep you guys posted, but I think that it is an experiment that has already been borne out multiple times in human populations, and we have seen the results clearly. It's certainly an experiment that I'm doing right now on myself, and I don't have cavities, and I eat a lot of fat-soluble nutrients, and I eat a lot of quote-unquote sugar in fruit and honey, not processed sugar though, however. So this is all to say that I do not believe cavities are a fluoride deficiency. There is a pretty clear body of literature to suggest that putting fluoride in the water does decrease at rates of tooth decay and rates of dental cavities. Fluoride can form hydroxyapatite, just like calcium can form hydroxyapatite in the tooth enamel, and that is resistant to cavities. Now, I don't believe that we need to be doing that with fluoridated water if our children are well nourished. In areas of the country where the children are not well nourished, is it a positive health intervention for public health? I'll let you decide what you want to do for yourself and your children. I don't think I would do it for my family because I would feed them the fat-soluble, nutrient-rich foods and therefore would avoid the need for fluoride in the water. I think fluoride is a Band-Aid in the water. Moving on, going deeper down the rabbit hole, what I will say is that 1 milligram per liter of fluoride is not a whole lot, to tell you the truth. There is evidence that fluoride occurs in many foods that we eat, and not quite at that level, but on the same order of magnitude. So I don't think fluoride is something that we have to avoid religiously in our lives. And I don't think we should be looking for low fluoride foods. I think we should be eating the best foods that we can and getting the fluoride that naturally occurs in those foods. But there are areas of the world where fluoride does occur. Like I showed you the graphic from Africa, at higher levels in the drinking water, and it's questionable what the optimal level of fluoride is in the water. I don't think we know what the optimal amount of fluoride is for humans in a day. I don't think it's 0 because I think it would be very hard to get 0 fluoride, but I'm not convinced that it's as high as current recommendations. If you go to, for instance, the Oregon State University's Linus Pauling Institute's post on fluoride, what you will find is that they are saying that I believe it's the RDI, so the adequate intake for fluoride for adults, males, is 4 milligrams per day. I'm not sure it's quite that high, or I'd agree with that. 3 for infants, they say quite a small amount. For children, they say 0.7 or 1. Who knows? I think the amount of fluoride we should be getting is the amount of fluoride that occurs naturally in well-raised foods. They're not drinking highly contaminated fluoridated water, right? So if your cows are drinking fluoridated water, then the milk might have more fluoride. You can see the problem we run into here. It's definitely an argument to consider that we might want to remove fluoride from our water if we're getting excess fluoride in our bodies. What are the effects of excess fluoride in the human body? Well, there are many. Like I said, there can be mottling and staining of the teeth. There is also a condition in bones known as bone fluorosis, where bones can become brittle. And so there is probably a sweet spot for fluoride. There are some studies that show that with excess fluoride, bone density increases, but bones do not become stronger. They can actually become more brittle. And there are other studies which show that when lower amounts of fluoride are used, that perhaps there is an improvement in the strength of the bones. So I think that there is a sweet spot for fluoride. Just like so many things, this is probably a U-shaped curve, meaning that 0 fluoride is probably not great for humans. We've probably always been exposed to some. It's an element that occurs naturally in the human diet, in our environments. There's a sweet spot. Sweet spot is probably below what most people are getting right now, in my belief. And then as you get to be too much fluoride, you see systemic manifestations that are quite pathological, fluorosis in the teeth, bones, etc. Then there is this topic of calcification of the pineal gland. And I was honestly a little skeptical of this when I first read about it. But as I read more about it, it actually is interesting. And I don't think we know fully, but I'll show you what I found. So there is not a large amount of data or research here, but what is there is interesting and enough to make me curious. This is a study called Fluoride Deposition in the Aged Human Pineal Gland by Jay Luke. It is from a university in the United Kingdom, in the UK, published in 2001. Looks like it was received in 1999. So basically, the author goes on to say that fluoride does not accumulate in the brain. Of all tissues, the brain has the lowest fluoride concentration. Generally agreed that the blood-brain barrier restricts the passage of fluoride into the central nervous system. But the human pineal gland is outside of the blood-brain barrier. It is one of the few unique regions of the brain where the blood-brain barrier is weak. Cells in these regions require direct and unimpeded contact with the blood. Therefore, pinealocytes have free access to fluoride in the bloodstream. This fact, coupled with the presence of HA, which is hydroxyapatite, calcium hydroxyapatite, or fluoride hydroxyapatite, suggests that the pineal gland may sequester fluoride from the bloodstream. You can see up here in the abstract, they did look at pineal calcium and pineal fluoride and compare this to bones. And their conclusion was that there was a positive correlation between pineal fluoride and pineal calcium, but no correlation between pineal fluoride and bone fluoride. By old age, the pineal gland has readily accumulated fluoride, and its fluoride to calcium ratio is higher than bone. Okay, that's interesting. This whole discussion around pineal gland calcification needs to be framed in the understanding that we really don't know why the pineal gland calcifies in humans as we age. Is this pathology or is this physiology? Is this a feature or is this a bug? We don't know, but it's an interesting question because the pineal gland does a lot of important things like producing melatonin and a number of other hormones, which I'll show you in a moment. So theoretically, if the pineal gland were calcifying pathologically, could that impede the excretion or secretion of melatonin into the body? That would be a problem as we age. It's an interesting observation and an interesting hypothesis, which we must examine, and I think is worth our curiosity. So you can see here a comparison of the fluoride-calcium ratio in aged pineal hydroxyapatite and the corresponding bone ash. This is the micrograms of fluoride per 100 micrograms of calcium. The calcium content of bone is determined by stoichiometry. If you guys are just listening to this, you can see that the pineal hydroxyapatite has much higher levels of fluoride than bone, right? So fluoride is accumulating in the pineal preferentially, perhaps is the right word, more than bone and more in other tissues of the body. So the pineal gland does calcify and the pineal gland does take up fluoride. Whether those are connected is questionable, but there's a few other things that are interesting to consider here. Again, I don't think we fully understand this question. Moving on, I want to show you guys this paper, which is actually a pretty good review, I thought. This is from a group that looks like they are based in, I'm not sure where this group is based. We can just cut that part out. Oh, here it is. This is a group based in UT Health in San Antonio. The title is Pineal Calcification, Melatonin Production, Aging, Associated Health Consequences, and Rejuvenation of the Pineal Gland. Okay, interesting. If you read this article, they have a lot of interesting things in there. They say the exact biological consequences of many of the substances in the pineal gland remains to be clarified, but the pineal gland does synthesize melatonin. Fans of Rogan, I count myself in that group, note that the pineal gland also synthesizes N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, a potent psychedelic, which is apparently released during orgasm and other intense experiences in our lives. So interesting. It's suggested to be exclusively generated by the pineal gland at birth, during dreaming, or near death to produce out-of-body experiences. We don't fully understand it. Pineal gland is also an important organ to synthesize neurosteroids from cholesterol, including testosterone, 5-alpha and 5-beta DHT, dihydrotestosterone, 7-alpha hydroxypregnenolone, and estradiol. So that's interesting that pineal gland is also making other hormones, yet more of a reason that we might not want it to calcify if that is a pathological process indeed. Again, melatonin is the most widely recognized product of the pineal gland, serving many important roles in the human body. They do note here that other tissues in the body can synthesize melatonin: skin, lens, ciliary body, gut, testes, ovary, uterus, bone marrow, placenta, oocytes, red blood cells, platelets, lymphocytes, astrocytes, glial cells, mast cells, and neurons. But I think that, at least as we believe, the majority of the melatonin in the cerebrospinal fluid, which is a circadian process, comes from the pineal gland. You can see here that over a circadian period in the day, if you look at the third ventricle and the melatonin in picograms per ml, there's a very circadian pattern, whereby in the evening, there's a much increased amount of melatonin in the CSF of the third ventricle, dropping off sharply with the daylight hours. Interestingly, there is evidence that insulin and melatonin are contradictory hormones, that melatonin may inhibit the secretion of insulin or vice versa. So I use this as an argument, perhaps a shallow argument, but nevertheless an argument that I use for myself to eat my meals early in the day. I don't want to have a bunch of insulin at night to prevent the secretion of melatonin. This is yet again getting us into territory regarding light and sleep and waking cycles. I think it's important to see bright lights in the morning to entrain your circadian rhythm. I find that I feel much better when I have a consistent time of sleep and a consistent time of waking. That also makes me somewhat of a boring human, but I will take it because I like to surf every morning. Let you decide how much of a boring human you want to be with the consistency of your sleeping and waking times. Later in this article, they also show pictures of the calcification of the pineal gland. It is in a lamellar laminated fashion, which is quite interesting. It seems to be laid down over time. The first picture here is the pineal calcification of a 14-year-old subject. B is a 47-year-old, C is a 62-year-old, and D is actually pictures of a bone. These are osteons, or functional units in a bone. So it looks very similar to that, but you can see that the ring structures on the inside of a pineal gland do appear to be more laid down as we age. Again, whether that's pathological or physiological, we do not know. Many will speculate. Certainly, most people will drink fluoridated water throughout their lives. Who knows? And if you go even further in, there's a few more pictures of calcification in the pineal gland. Quite interesting. I think there's an interesting curiosity here. Now, they talk about this fluoride question a little later on in the article. They say, however, the environmental biohazards may contribute to its development. We don't know for sure. One of them is fluoride. It was reported that the pineal gland in goosander concentrates fluoride, which is a water pollutant. Now, goosander, I had to look it up, are ducks. The level of the fluoride in pineal gland of goosander was 5-fold higher than that in the brain of the animal. That's similar in humans. Similar results were observed in the aged human pineal gland. Does it correlate? Do goosander pineal glands have more fluoride in water that has more pollution? That would be a quite interesting question to answer. In addition, they continue, the high level of fluoride in the human pineal gland is positively related to its calcium accumulation in the gland. That's really the study that I showed you previously. So when I read those two studies, I thought, okay, that's interesting. I'm not convinced that we have enough here to really be curious. Then I came across this one, which is in aged male rats, but it's compelling. And so the title of the study is Fluoride-Free Diet Stimulates Pineal Growth in Aged Male Rats. And this is interesting. They did 4 weeks of a fluoride-free drinking water for the rats. They either then added back 4 weeks of fluoride, or they continued for 8 weeks of a fluoride-free drinking water in these rats. They say, and they compared these to control animals who were drinking fluoridated water. And you imagine most of the water given to lab animals has fluoride in it. So this is why this is such an interesting question, because it's very hard to study. There's not a lot of water in the world that doesn't have fluoride, at least in the United States and research laboratories. These control animals, these being the fluoride animals, were compared to other animals that were placed on a fluoride-free diet for 4 or 8 weeks. At 4 weeks, the pineal glands from fluoride-free animals showed a 96% increase in supporting cell numbers, and at 8 weeks, a 73% increase in the number of pinealocytes. These are pineal gland cells compared to control animals. In contrast, the number of pinealocytes and supporting cells in animals given an initial 4-week fluoride flush, followed by a return to fluoridated drinking water, which was 1.2 ppm of sodium fluoride, which is, again, 1.2 milligrams per liter, akin to the levels that I talked about earlier, for 4 weeks were not different from control animals. Our findings therefore demonstrate that a fluoride-free diet encouraged pinealocyte proliferation in the pineal gland, growth in aged animals, and fluoride treatment inhibited gland growth. These findings suggest that dietary fluoride may be detrimental to the pineal gland. That's interesting. It's in aged rats. I would love to see this in humans. It would be a fascinating study in humans. I'm not sure how you would study pinealocyte growth in humans, considering that gland is in the middle of your brain. It's basically the exact center of your skull. But nevertheless, you can see the chart here, looking at total cells in black, pinealocytes in white, and supporting cells in gray. And you can see here in group 2, this is the group that got 4 weeks of fluoride-free water. The total cells and the supporting cells increased significantly over the controls. Group 3 had 4 weeks return to fluoride water, and there was no growth. And group 4 was the group that's most compelling. All the cells grew, including the pinealocytes, significantly higher than controls. This was 8 weeks of a fluoride-free diet. Now, I don't exactly, they may say in the paper how much fluoride was in the diets of these animals too, but they at least had fluoride-free water. So very compelling if you're a rat. If you're not a rat, I think the question still remains. So let's talk a little bit more about fluoride, and then I will wrap up with my perspective. There's an interesting website that I found, which is very anti-fluoride. And on this website, you can search for the fluoride content of food. So I thought, okay, how much fluoride is in meat? This is a USDA database, and you can see that lamb has 0.32 parts per million, so less than 1, which is what is in most drinking water. Chicken has 0.15, salami 0.41, beef carcass. So animal foods do have fluoride in the meat. Now, the question is then, is this from fluoride in the drinking water of these animals? So that's a question that is quite curious. And I think it's going to be difficult to avoid fluoride in your meat. But if you want to lower the fluoride in your diet, you could drink fluoride-free water. Again, I think the best way to achieve that, as I said in the beginning, is drinking water from something like a reverse osmosis filter. So I want to show you fruit. You can see that fruit is lower, generally, at least the ones that were studied in fluoride, than animal foods. So curious, is the fruit watered with fluoride water? Probably, but it doesn't seem to accumulate fluoride in the same way that animal meat does, or perhaps there is a physiologic role for fluoride in animal meat, and we're going to get some of it regardless of what we do. Now, I mentioned earlier there was one study that showed a benefit to fluoride. I just want to make sure that I show both sides of the issue. The effects of treatment with fluoride on bone mineral density and fracture risk, a meta-analysis. They say here, fluoride treatment increases spine and hip bone mineral density depending on the treatment duration and also on the dose. Overall, there was no effect on hip or spine fracture risk. However, in subgroup analyses, a low fluoride dose, or less than 20 milligrams per day of fluoride equivalents, which is pretty low fluoride. 20 milligrams a day is a lot of fluoride. If the Oregon State University fluoride site says that 4 milligrams a day is the adequate intake, 20 milligrams a day is quite a big dose. There was a significant reduction in fracture risk. So I think it is also possible that in humans, fluoride does serve a role, again, perhaps a U-shaped curve, and that some fluoride is not harmful for us. I think this is a really interesting question. There is also a lot of discussion about fluoride and brain damage, or I should say, mental slowing in humans. And if you look at that literature, it's quite heterogeneous and the studies are not well conducted. So I don't think we can make any accurate assessment about fluoride in drinking water and IQ in humans. The studies are all over the place. Again, we can't say anything there. I could not say that based on my reading of the literature and my research that more fluoride in the drinking water equals lower IQs. But my conclusion from all of my fluoride research and curiosity was definitely that I probably didn't want to be drinking fluoride at 1 part per million in my water, and that tooth enamel decay is not related to a fluoride deficiency. It's related to a vitamin K2, D, E, and A deficiency. We can also get vitamin E from animal fat. I talked about that a lot in the past. So I think if you're going to get fluoride in your food, let it occur naturally like our ancestors would have experienced, and do not, I would not fluoridate my water. That's what I will leave it with. I will leave it to you guys whether you want to drink fluoride in your water, but I will say that a reverse osmosis filter will remove fluoride from your water, and you can decrease the amount of fluoride in your diet by drinking fluoride-free water. So like I said, I thought fluoride was going to be a slam dunk. I thought it was going to be, this is the worst thing in the world. It's horrible. It's a little more nuanced than that. I think it's quite fascinating. I don't think we should be putting it in drinking water, but then again, most of the population eats like garbage. And so maybe it's a net negative, maybe it's a net positive, excuse me. So hard to say. I don't get fluoride in my water. I use reverse osmosis. I would avoid it. Maybe we can do experiments in the future and see if human pinealocytes can regenerate when you have a low fluoride diet. That's a fascinating study in rats. Again, it's just in rats. We don't fully know. So let's talk a little bit about the Berkey stuff before we move on to the bottled water. So do Berkey filters, PF2 filters, leach aluminum in your water? This is actually from the Berkey website. If you go to the Berkey website, they're going to say, no, don't worry about it. It's aluminum oxide, which is inert. I don't think I want that in the first place anyway. So I think Berkeys, unfortunately, are an imperfect solution to water filtration. The good thing about a Berkey is that it doesn't require electricity. So a lot of areas in the world where you don't need electricity, or you don't have electricity, you can use a filter like that. Great. My countertop reverse osmosis filter needs electricity. If you've got electricity, I think that's a better option. If you don't have electricity, Berkey is probably a fantastic option for Tanzania or the Akun or any of these people that are filtering water out of a stream. Fantastic option. If you have electricity, I think a reverse osmosis is better, especially a countertop reverse osmosis. I should note that I do not believe that under the sink reverse osmosis units require electricity, but then again, a lot of places where there's no electricity, there are no sinks. There's a couple of farms, we call them fincas here in Costa Rica that I've been to that have essentially running water that is directly from a creek, and there's no electricity there. And there's no sink. There's no way they could put a reverse osmosis filter in there. But they could use a Berkey filter, and that would be probably better than what they're doing. I glossed over one other piece that I think is interesting on the Environmental Working Group site, which is the PFAS contamination. They have a map of the United States where these chemicals are found and where they're contaminating. These are mostly flame retardants. If you look at them, I looked at Austin, for instance, you find that a lot of this is perhaps related to flame retardant foam from firefighting. This is the type of thing that ended up in Topo Chico water. So you should know what is in your bottled water. I will go down that rabbit hole in one moment. But first, I want to say a few words about alkaline water and then structured water, and then we'll talk about bottled water. Let's start with alkaline water. We can save a lot of oxygen here and just say it's bullshit. I have a bottle of alkaline water that I was going to bring up for the podcast, but I left it downstairs. I was filming some bullshit videos with it. On the side of the bottle, it says immunity booster. Complete bullshit. You could drink way too much alkaline water and make your body too alkaline. It's not a good thing. Your body's used to drinking water that has a neutral pH. Water is usually pH of 7. That's just what it is. Alkaline water is bullshit. You don't need to alkalinize your body. The idea that you need to be excessively alkaline or that alkalinity will prevent cancer is total horseshit. Your body regulates your pH. That is the amount of hydrogen ions or the log of the hydrogen ion concentration in your body so closely 7.35, 7.45. You can get metabolic alkalosis. You can get respiratory alkalosis. There's all sorts of problems. You can become too alkalotic, and you could probably become too alkalotic by drinking too much alkaline water, too much baking soda. Your body needs it to be a certain pH. That's how the cellular reactions in your body function. I also think this is kind of connected a little bit with apple cider vinegar, which I also think is bullshit. It has no real benefits for humans, other than perhaps if you have underlying stomach issues and you actually don't have enough stomach acid, drinking something that's super acidic might help be a surrogate acid. But why wouldn't you just correct the root cause of your stomach acid that's low in the first place? Apple cider vinegar is bullshit, but apple cider vinegar won't alkalinize you. I don't think it'll make you acidic either. I heard a doctor on YouTube saying that apple cider vinegar would make you more acidic, and that was cure for the chronic alkalinity because of our hypercortisolemia. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, this guy's so full of shit. It's total bullshit. So alkaline water, bullshit. You don't need that. Drink regular, clean, pure water. If you want to remineralize it, great. I don't think it's necessary for most of us, but alkaline water, that's all I need to say. It's bullshit. You don't want high pH alkaline water. Don't do that. You don't want to drink a bunch of acid all the time either. Don't drink apple cider vinegar unless you want to erode the tooth enamel. If you have reflux, if you have GI issues, figure out the cause of those. Don't use apple cider vinegar as a crutch there either. So that's alkaline water, structured water. Okay, so many proponents of structured water would say that there is this fourth phase of water. Gerald Pollack, who's at the University of Washington, has done some interesting research on exclusion zone of water. They put water next to a gel membrane, and they do see this exclusion zone where water may, in a liquid form a gel-like structure where it is a little bit more hexagonal. He says it's like ice, but it's not ice. Okay, maybe. Now, to extrapolate that to devices that cost $500 to $2,000 and move the water in a vortex, and that structures water, is too much for me. Does my water coming out of a reverse osmosis filter, is that dead water? Is that unstructured water? I can't get behind this, guys. I just don't think that I need to put my water through a vortex and spin it and restructure it. According to most of these websites, I could restructure the water just by doing a dance naked in the moonlight in my house in Costa Rica and putting it in the sun. So maybe I'll just do that to try and restructure it. That's obviously a joke. I think if you do reverse osmosis water, that's about as good as you can get. I don't think you need to restructure it. Please don't spend $500 on a device that spins your water in a vortex and restructures it. If that were the case, all the water coming out of your toilet would be very structured, and you should just flush your toilet and collect all the water because it's creating this beautiful vortex, and you should just drink your toilet water. It's structured water, right? So I'm unconvinced about structured water. I think it's basically a pretty big scam. I think most of the research on it has not been in any way, shape, or form repeated in any consistent way. And I really look forward to somebody doing some consistent research on structured water and showing it's better for humans. But I think that it's a scam, and I wouldn't do it. And I don't think crystals are going to structure your water either. Don't fall for that. Just for the sake of completeness, there is one study that shows the potential benefits of drinking pH 8.8 alkaline water. Drinking water as an adjunct in the treatment of reflux disease. Bullshit. You know what else will make your stomach contents very alkaline? A proton pump inhibitor or an H2 blocker, which have horrible consequences. Yes, if you drink baking soda or pH 8.8 water, it will cause your stomach acid to be less acidic, which is a real problem for your digestion in general. It doesn't fix reflux. You're still going to reflux. You're just going to reflux more alkaline contents in the esophagus. You're not going to digest your food. You're not going to absorb your nutrients. And you have an increased rate of dementia, and I believe an increased rate of community-acquired pneumonia if we look at the studies with proton pump inhibitors. So bullshit. Interestingly, pH 8.8 alkaline water instantly denatures pepsin. That's an important digestive enzyme, perhaps not something you want to denature. So I don't know why you want to use alkaline water to do that. Just like you wouldn't want to be doing a whole bunch of baking soda in your life. That's going to cause problems too. So let your body adjust its acid alkaline balance. There was a podcast I did a long time ago where I actually talked about the ability of children to self-select acid and alkaline foods. There are indeed acid and alkaline foods. Your body will adjust, and your urinary pH will be the ultimate arbiter. Generally, kids will mix and balance acidic and alkaline foods. I don't think either is bad. You don't want all alkaline foods. You don't want all acidic foods either. I think this is one of the reasons that you could make, or one of the stances you could take for including fruit or some plant products like fruit, but not vegetables, on your animal-based rather than carnivore diet. The carnivore acolytes will hate that statement. One last thing that I did want to talk about, if people don't want to do reverse osmosis, is bottled water. And I found this quite interesting when I went down the rabbit hole about it last year, because a lot of the waters that I thought were really good contained uranium and other radioactive elements. Now, the thing to also realize here is that all of us are exposed to radiation. There's background radiation in everything we do in our lives. But if you are drinking a water that has a higher concentration of radioactivity in it, then that could increase your exposure to background radiation, and that may not be a great thing. So, this is just an article about the amount of radiation that we are exposed to every year from natural sources. So 2.2 millisieverts every year from background radiation, radiation from sources like sun, radioactive earth, rocks. Small amounts pass up in the food chain. And one chest x-ray is 0.02 millisieverts. A CT scan, interestingly, is about 7 millisieverts, so it's quite high. A transatlantic flight exposes you to 0.1 millisieverts, around 5 times the radiation of a chest x-ray. Mammogram is 0.6 millisieverts, same as does in flights across the Atlantic. Again, a CT scan here is 7 millisieverts. You don't want to have that much radiation many times a year. Workers in a nuclear power plant get 20 millisieverts. Radiographers get about 20. Probably not great. Astronauts on the International Space Station exposed to 100 millisieverts. That's 20 CT scans, 20 mammogram, 250 mammograms, 7,500 chest x-rays. Probably not a good thing. It takes a dose of 1,000 millisieverts in a short period of time to induce acute radiation sickness. That's really bad. Heavier exposure of 10,000 millisieverts can result in cell and neurological damage, even death. That would be a catastrophic event. So I want to put some of this stuff in context, because one of these articles actually does show what the equivalent millisievert increase would be if you were drinking some of these waters. So you can see here on the CDC website, 0.035 millisieverts of cosmic radiation if you were to fly within the United States. Pretty small amount, but they actually then break it down for the average annual dose for natural sources of radiation. The inhalation, 2.28 millisieverts, 73% just from inhaling, I guess cosmic dust, radioactive dust. Then you have some from the internal by ingestion, 0.29 millisieverts. Well, as you'll see, drinking some of these bottled waters, you could get much more than 0.29 millisieverts of radiation. Whether or not that's important remains to be seen. Terrestrial exposure is 0.21 millisieverts. So just wanted to put all of that in context for you guys as we begin to look at some of these waters. So what waters do we think about? Well, let's start with this one, which is the natural radioactivity content in Italian bottled mineral waters. Believe me, I love these guys as much as you. But if you look at the results, you can see here that some of the waters like San Pellegrino, I can't highlight it, but look at the gross beta in San Pellegrino. Beta are beta particles, which are essentially like electrons. It's 487 plus or minus 162. That's a pretty big range. I mean, some of these are even higher. The highest one on here is 1,500, 1,300, but some of these are even lower, 90. And a lot of these Italian bottled waters I've never seen. They have all these really Italian amazing names. San Stefano, San Benedetto. I can get that one here in Costa Rica. That one's 129, but San Pellegrino is 487. But here's one called Tocca, which is 1,300. I don't know if I'd want to drink that one. Vitisanella. So if you like Italian bottled mineral waters, or you live in Italy, you may want to go through these lists and look at the alpha and beta on these mineral waters and see. Now, one thing that's quite interesting is I don't think we actually know what the radiation of most tap water is. It would be interesting to kind of look into that as well, but I think it's much less than many of these mineral waters. So we can also then go to another article which looks at, I have all sorts of mineral waters here. So here is radioactivity in bottled mineral waters in general. And you can see here they are looking at France, Portugal, and Spain. So we're spanning the gamut of mineral waters. There's all kinds of different things. They have alpha and beta, pretty similar to what we saw from the other study, but I think this is the beta Q per liter, and I believe the other one was beta Q per milliliter. So these units are going to look a little differently, but you can see that some of the ones I can get here in Costa Rica, the Font d'Or, I can see how much alpha and beta there is here. Just wanted you guys to know that many of these mineral waters do contain these things, and that Gerolsteiner's somewhere in the middle when you look at it compared to other mineral waters. That one is interesting because it was just some of the things I find here. Also, Vichy Catalan is one that we find here a lot and is treasured here people say, oh, it's great because it's quite salty. But if you look here in the BQ per liter and the dry residue, and you look at this equivalent millisieverts per year for Vichy Catalan, it's 1.36. And here's another one that's 2.26, and I've never seen this Pedras Salgadas mineral water, but you could get 2.26 extra millisieverts a year just by drinking this mineral water, if that was the only thing you drank, if you were sipping it in your champagne flute overlooking your Italian or French or Spanish villa. But anyway, certainly here in Costa Rica, it is possible that people would drink quite a bit of Vichy Catalan if that were all they were doing. And whether or not this extra 1.36 millisieverts per year is worth it is questionable. But I chose to try and minimize my exposure to uranium, or at least other radioactive particles, which are a combination of alpha and beta. So one more article here that I think is interesting. This is the contribution of uranium in the drinking waters to the daily uranium intake of humans, a case study from Northern Germany. If you can read German, there's a translation here, or the full German, at least in the abstract. But you can see here, you can see tap water, you can see groundwater wells, and they look at the amount of uranium, and they're looking at the amount of uranium in bread, meat, vegetables, coffee, tea, fruits, and then beverages, such as bottled mineral waters, which can have significant amounts of uranium in them. And then some of these German ones like Gerolsteiner have a uranium concentration of 1.9 micrograms per liter, not insignificant. Some of these other ones, Saskia, 10.4, contribution of uranium in mineral water to the daily uranium intake. So for instance, Gerolsteiner here was 50% of the uranium intake in this German study. That's significant. If you just stopped drinking Gerolsteiner, you'd have 50% less uranium, which is radioactive element. I would do that. Look, 84% from Saskia, Leislinger, Font Randa. They sound so German and exciting. Axtaler, 58%. Some of them are quite low though. So just to know that if you're drinking these German mineral waters, they do contain uranium. Some people, when I did the first video, said, I think Gerolsteiner is worth it because of all the minerals in Gerolsteiner. Again, I'm not convinced that water is where we should be getting most of our minerals from in the first place. I think we should be getting them from meat and organs and fruit and other food. One mineral water that I do like, again, there's no affiliation here, is Mountain Valley. I pulled their water quality reports, and if you believe what they say, then their total dissolved solids are 220. I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that when I put water through a reverse osmosis filter, it ends up at about 13 total dissolved solids. So it's taking out all these minerals. But in this mineral water, that is Mountain Valley, you have calcium, magnesium, and potassium as the minerals, probably some trace minerals. It is the pH of 7.3. It's not super alkaline, but then they're looking at the amount of other contaminants. These are contaminants that are found in many of the tap waters that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, bromo, chloroacetic acid, et cetera. None of those were detected in Mountain Valley spring water. Great. Radiologicals, they actually talk about uranium, none detected. Great. That made me happy. The gross alpha and gross beta were none. That's incredible. There's a little bit of radium, at least the variance, but nothing major. And you can see here aluminum, antimony, arsenic, nothing. The only thing here, there was a little bit of barium, a little bit of bromide, a little bit of calcium, like they say, no cyanide, thankfully, and 0.1 milligrams per liter of fluoride. So that is probably 1/10 as much fluoride as your drinking water, but it still contains some. Then they go on to do lead, none, no lead detected, magnesium, a little bit, manganese, mercury, nickel, not much. A little bit of sulfate, no thallium. So as far as I could tell, I mean, gosh, this Mountain Valley is pretty darn clean. So if you were going to drink look at all these not detected, not detected, not detected. Again, this podcast should be sponsored by Mountain Valley, but it's not. If you want to drink a spring water, Mountain Valley would probably be the one that I would select. The silica is fairly low in Mountain Valley, but if we believe silica is beneficial, I simply can't find a good spring water that has moderate amounts of silica that isn't contaminated with other things. That's a whole separate podcast that I've done already. But the takeaway there was that if we believe silica is beneficial for removing aluminum from the human body, you would want a very clean water that is very high in silica. Perhaps Fiji water is like that, but then Fiji water has a bunch of plastic contaminants in it. I just can't get behind drinking water in plastic every day either. So what I do for my water, as I said in the beginning, is I use a reverse osmosis filter to filter the water from my sink. That essentially creates 13 part per million water with really nothing in it of any significance. Hopefully, it's not very radioactive coming out of my tap. I should think about testing that. I'm almost doing no bottled water anymore, and I don't think I need to remineralize it. Maybe some of you will convince me otherwise, but I think I'm getting minerals just when I swallow seawater, which I definitely do every single day in the ocean and in my food. And it seems to be going well. I like the taste of it, and I think that, like I said, Berkeys don't cut it. Carbon filters don't cut it. The filters in your fridge don't cut it. Don't ignore fluoride in your water. Don't fear it, but I don't think you need it to prevent tooth decay in your children. I would feed them meat and organs, either fresh or desiccated, like we make at Heart and Soil Supplements, if you need some more of the fat-soluble vitamins in your life. So hopefully that is an A to Z on water. That's how I do my water. That's what I don't do. Whether or not you should worry about fluoride, alkaline water, structured water, bottled water, covered all of it. The only thing I didn't cover was deuterium in the water, which I don't worry about at all anymore, guys. I just think that deuterium in the water is way, way, way too granular. We can't possibly worry about that as humans. It was a rabbit hole that I went down when I first did this podcast, but I just think that deuterium depleted water is another one of these kind of hoaxy, weird things that isn't really that physiologically relevant for humans. Maybe I'll be proven wrong about that in the future. All of you water acolytes, you water enthusiasts will scream and yell at this one, but hopefully that helps. That's a long-winded way of saying don't drink tap water, use reverse osmosis water, eat real food, and get out there in the sun and thrive like you always do otherwise. But know what's in your water. My sister is getting a reverse osmosis filter right now. I'm sending it to her because I can't have a family drinking that garbage in the tap water. Hope you guys are thriving. Please share this with people that you think may benefit. Love you all.